Hi, everyone, and welcome to this evening's conversation on nuance and intimacy in the architecture of the city. My name is Manijay Verghese, and I'm the head of public engagement here at the AA. And I'm really delighted to welcome everyone here for what will definitely be a really exciting and lively conversation in memory of Diane Lewis, who, as most of you probably know, was a very important architect and educator and who taught for many years at the Cooper Union. While Diane's contributions to education are very well known, we were very surprised to find that there wasn't much recorded in the AA's archives of her time here. And I think there's like a mention of her teaching Intermediate 5 from 1989 to 1990. And there's a lecture that's in our archives that she gave as part of the public program in 1999. So tonight's event that brings together her many friends and collaborators is really important to kind of fill these gaps in our institutional memory. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what all of our panel members have to say. It's really wonderful to have YAEL here tonight. YAEL HAMEIRI SAINSAUX is an architect, writer, educator, and curator who both organized this event but also curated the exhibition Conceiving the Plan for the 2021 Italian Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale. And you can see an excerpt from this outside in the hallway with an amazing film of Diane speaking almost directly to you as you enter the school. And you can also purchase the accompanying book in the room back there after this lecture. So if you haven't already, don't miss out on it. I'm conscious that there are many people here in the room, both at the panel and in the audience, who probably have a lot to say and share. So I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm just going to hand over to YAEL to introduce the event and also the many panel members we have today. And so please join me in welcoming everyone to the AA.
Thank you so much, Manijay, and everyone else in the AA public program for organizing everything and for all your communications. I'm honored to be here in this important architecture school, and I really thank all of you to making this happen, including Edward Buttons from the archive, who put Diane's record right from the time of her teaching here, Andrew Whittaker from the AA bookshop, and also Skira, our publisher, who contributed to this event. To our presenters, next to me, Tim McFarlane, structural engineer based in London, who taught here at the AA with Diane, and he will draw a picture of her presence in a moment. I will give then an outline of critical themes from Diane's architectural vision, and I have invited 5 colleagues who all contributed to Conceiving the Plan, so their work is also in the book, and we're also here to celebrate this publication, to speak of Diane. They're all architects running independent practices and engaging in critical teaching. Each will present a unique aspect of Lewis's legacy. Anna Kostreva is an architect, teacher, and author based in Berlin and Bristol. Holger Kleine is a Berlin-based architect and a professor in Hochschule Weinmain in Wiesbaden. Dorian Wisniewski is a senior academic at the University of Edinburgh, teaching theory and design. Catherine Van Aert is an associate professor in Dalhousie University, whose practice and research is based in Germany and the Netherlands. Peter Lynch is a researcher at KTH Stockholm and was the head of the graduate architecture department at Cranbrook. And lastly, thankfully, Rosamund Diamond is going to moderate our discussion. She's an architect, writer, and assistant professor at the University of Nottingham, who taught here at the AA and was a friend and a colleague for Diane in London.
Yeah, I'm not an academic, nor am I an architect. So I'm sitting at this table purely because I think I'm the AA contact with Diane, as it were. So rather than talk about her academic work in any way, I'm just going to tell a couple of short stories that maybe tell you something. If you never met Diane, you don't know what a kind of a force she was, because she was a kind of force of nature, really. And I met her on the 1st of October 1992 at Peter Thomas's birthday party, Kathy. So it's a weird thing. And she came and perched herself opposite me in the table. She said, I hear you're an engineer, you know, with little bright eyes going. I said, yeah. And she said, I've got a project in New York. Would you like to work on it? What? Yes. Yes, please. In 1992, there wasn't a lot going on in London, so I got over there, and it was a project called the Kunsthalle, and that was a kind of big building just down from Cooper Union. It used to be called Mothers, and this thing had burned down under suspicious circumstances. And there was a big insurance claim going on it. Anyway, the client for this was a man called Martin Kunst, and oddly enough, and he had this idea of building this institution in New York. The first meeting, I'm not going to, because that isn't the story I was going to tell, but just to say, the first meeting was extraordinary. You know, she said to me, meet me at the loss adjuster's office. Ah, okay. So I got there, and there was a guy waiting there. He's like Al Capone. He had a great big suit, you know, and he had that tan that just came round here. You know? You see? Anyway, he was the expediter. They got these things called expediters in New York. So he was there, and suddenly it was like a play. Like all of my interactions with Diane were like an intense play in which you learned and learned and learned and experienced. It was just extraordinary. And during this meeting, there was about 5 or 6 characters there. She was defending the client's claim for this lot of money to do the work, and the loss adjuster was trying to beat her down. And she was being very, very forceful. And at one point, the loss adjuster actually came up across the table to physically assault her. And there was a little guy in the room who was from the dumpster company, right? The dumpster company, he was Italian, he was about 21. And when she'd come in, he said, you know, you remind me of my sister, you know. And she liked that because she liked being thought of as Italian. Anyway, he jumped up and grabbed this loss adjuster and kind of almost put him up against, you know, I'm sort of, this is my first day in New York. It's like, this is insane. Anyway, they went through, she worked in this project, and I had the privilege of sitting in her office listening to discussions, which were the finest discussions, absolutely brilliant discussions between her and this man, this client. And it was just a joy, you know. So we were there and built up the design, and then there was going to be a big press conference. So it was arranged that it would all happen on the top of the building, which the burnt-out building on the roof. And we were all up all night. She had everybody do everything. I was doing drawings on the boards, the presentation drawings, you know, engineer. And anyway, we got them all ready, and we took them up there on a winter's morning, January. Blue sky, very, very cold. She had a little 2-piece suit on, you know, and we were all with her. And she got up, and there was about 10 hardened New York journalists under a little cover, all wrapped up in scarves and all kind of warm. And she was given 5 minutes. She did 4 minutes, 59 seconds, and she gave this most brilliant description of what a Kunsthalle could mean to a city. And they were all crying. I'm nearly crying now. And remember, you know, it was just so powerful. You think, wow, you know, she just depicted something that was so vital for us as human beings to have and to access. And it was just extraordinary. You know, that's who she was. She had that power. She really did. And the second story is the funny story, really, because she had great power, but she used to upset people, my goodness. So, American Academy at Rome, she loved that. She went there. That was a real thing. Rome she loved. And so they said, somehow she got invited to give a talk. for this 150th anniversary. So going along fine till she fell out with the organizer, right? And really fell out with the organizer because the organizer said, by the way, Diane, your talk, this is Italy, right? Your talk is at 12:30 lunchtime. Oh, and by the way, the talk before yours is by the most famous archaeologist who ever attended the university. So, everybody's at his talk going around the city. And I turned up, me and Diane turned up at American Academy. I don't know if you know the building. It's got a beautiful big room. And it's got a lecture hall off to the right. So we got there, wandered down to lecture. Not a soul, like not a soul there. It was me and Diane. And we were turning around, and there's this guy coming down the corridor. And she said, you're here for the lecture. He obviously wasn't here for the lecture. She said, come. And she took the two of us up. And she sat us down in a settee in this big hall, and she sat in the fireplace. And she delivered her lecture. Absolutely fantastic lecture on Stendhal and his journeys into Italy. And me and the guy, because she do that, she actually just make you cry because she's, she could see things, say things, describe things that were so powerful, really. That's Diane. I have 100 stories. I'm sorry, I only get 6 or 7 minutes, but and they're all quite as extraordinary. I sometimes think was in some sort of dream or a silly, did this really happen? But she had such a vital life force that it's very rare and very privileged to have known her. Thank you.
And she would look straight in your eyes when she would give the lecture, and sometimes straight into 40 people's eyes constantly. I don't know how she did that. So I wanted to kind of ground a few of the critical elements from Diane's legacy, and obviously a big part of it is her teaching. So please bear with me. I am going to read to you my presentation. And I will attempt to outline across 7 themes the main points that I want to share with you about Diane. These 7 themes are intimacy, the studier, history in relation to the individual author and the metahistorical reading of the city, the literary dimension and nuance, the civic, mythic reading, and finally a note on the slide behind us. In her lecture here at the AA in 1999, Diane Lewis, then a professor of architecture at the Cooper Union on sabbatical, teaching in Berlin, posed a set of critical questions focused on intimacy. She held these questions pertinent to architectural practice. Can the architect be responsible in creating intimacy of space? Following, can they intimate their creation into the architecture of the city? Diane's challenge for the practice was whether or not the text of the plan can actually intimate the intention of the architect and the specific qualities of the program in relationship from one author to the other in the architectural frame. For Diane, the practice of architecture, as well as its teaching, was defined as a study. Under this umbrella, she invited her students to enter the discipline. From day one in architecture school, they had both the privilege and the responsibility to be considered part of what she called this guild of thinkers. You are as good as an architect as you are a studier, she would say. Every day, the problem has to be studied. Practice and teaching were not separate, nor was an architect differentiated from a student. Anna Kostreva will concretize Diane as a studier through her notes from Rome. Reading the City, metahistorical text of iconography of plans, sections, and order is informative in understanding individuals' role relative to the collective memory of history. Diane's view of history is a spatial, visceral reading of T.S. Eliot in architectural terms. The historical sense, he explains, involves a perception not only of the pastness of the past, but of its presence. This historical sense, which is a sense of the timeless as well as the temporal, and of the timeless and of the temporal together, is what makes a writer traditional. And it is at the same time what makes a writer most acutely conscious of his place in time, of his contemporaneity. The continuity of history and the timelessness of our current consciousness together foster a non-linear understanding of history. For both Eliot and Lewis, it is through the activity of reading that we place ourselves in time. And for Diane, it was reading the plan. History subsists in the text of architecture as a physical and metaphysical condition. Within it, the conversation carried across time and space. Holger Kleiner's presentation will further address the individual's role in relation to the collective memory of Berlin. In Inside Out, Lewis explains, an architectural reading of a city is akin to a literary ability wherein facts must be penetrated to infinitely renew the implicit and explicit possibilities of structure. The literary ability is that of being able to excavate nuances and character while sustaining a consciousness of the thickness of the separation of temporal distance and structural rescaling. She adopted her notion of the literary dimension from Walter Benjamin, deferring to his explanation of literary technique as the artist's position in the work. In her literary dimension, she incorporated both the nuances that create poetic structure and the ethical aspects of political responsibility. Doran Wisniewski's presentation will provide another perspective on these themes. The architecture is to smell the latent condition, asserts their free will so long as the ethical construct of the civic is maintained. Simon Sparks interviewed Diane on BBC Radio 4 in a series entitled Being American to coincide with the 1996 US elections, and thank you, Rose Diamond, for that. While standing outside on Park Avenue and 53rd Street in Manhattan, she was talking about the architecturally finished Liverhouse street level. In building it, she claimed, a corporate entity still held some public social conscience. Right off the street, a gallery space protected by ceiling with view through columns, it is an entire block as a free plan. Such moment transformed the city with civic conscience. After Sparks inserted a Frank Lloyd Wright recording on democracy, Diane continued, and now I quote, Today criticism is all about building, style, design. Nobody's talking about architecture. Architecture is the root of civilization. It has to do with building a room where certain kinds of interactions can occur spiritually. Certain conscience can be made, certain commitments can be made among people to create the fundaments for people to have enriched existences. We will revisit the Liver House in the civic context with Catherine Van Aert. A new physical reality emerges in the plan of the city with projects that substantiate and transform relevant mythologies. The literary critic Northrop Frye helps us to understand this mythic reading. The structural principles are not derived from analogy with something external, nor from language's reference to itself. Internal to architecture's expressions, it contains the physical reality of conceptual implications from the past, taken to their full realization in the plan of the city, a recognizable text with traceable roots. Myth for Frye is an abstract form by which he means a purely literary world of fictional and thematic design, unaffected by canons of plausible adaptations to familiar existence. Thus, abstraction is the freedom to find artistic articulation of relationships and phenomena liberated from visual reality as we know it, yet rooted in the most ancient metaphors of human existence. Frye calls this a world of total metaphor, inside a single infinite body. Like the plan of the city, a body of architectural space, myth is an art of implicit metaphorical identity. In Diane's words, as she concluded her lecture here 25 years ago, I am very interested in the individual struggle of the author to imbue mythic readings of their position in time and society into the plans of cities. Architecture must reveal the circumstantial and the ideal simultaneously. Peter Lynch will follow one thread of that lecture, the circumstantial or prefigured structure of the city. And to the slide, I can't say behind me, but everywhere in the room. For Lewis, the Nolly plan revealed architectural elements of civic spaces, whether open or covered, as they converse across history in scale and syntax. Within it, one of the most significant instances in her teaching involved Michelangelo's Piazza del Campidoglio, a project Siegfried Giedion described as a sublime spatial symphony. Giedion explains that Michelangelo knew how to give succinct expression to the conflicting motives that actuate every human being and every true democracy. The need to preserve the rights of the individual while safeguarding those of the community. Michelangelo's envisioning of new civic possibilities in his contemporary city projected into the future, while also weaving Roman imperial history and redefining the Omphalos of Delphi, its myth, as a new umbilicus. What is shown on the plan, Diane concluded, is a magnificent structural poem. And to that, Rosamund Diamond will respond in moderating our panel.
It's so nice to have Diane already introduced and in the room. I'm going to do something kind of simple, but kind of complicated in that I had the chance to research her notebooks from 1977 when she was at the American Academy in Rome, and that feature in the book that was published. And I'm basically going to show you some of these fragments and present some of her architectural readings and dialogues with what she would later call individual authors of collective memory. Bramante, Bernini, Michelangelo, Vittone, Guarini, and unknown architects. These architects offer up precise architecture, and Diane takes note. Her intense and layered understanding of the collective plan involved seeing just these sorts of civic spaces of the city as the bond between body and soul, poetry of the sensorial mixed with myth and culture, meaningful historical acts preserved through their physical architectural manifestation. So Let's start with San Maria della Pace. November 5th, 1977. I was at customs today claiming my kilos back home. Haven't opened them yet. I await the delivery with the fear of opening the fragrance of my studio into the house and missing it, or keeping it. Tonight, when I think of you, I remember the hot morning we went to the Piazza Navona and had an overwhelming tartufo first thing. It became gray and felt windy. We walked to Bramante's court at San Maria della Pace. Fast rain hit, then bounced on the dark part of the surface, but streamed and slid in rhythms down the white marble diagonals through the circular center drain. And I remember saying to you, Robert, it's autumn now in Rome. I had never before seen the beginning of a season instantly and obviously. And the next 4 were like that there. Ponte Sant'Angelo. My strongest memories of scale distorting and dwarfing are in my walks across the Ponte Sant'Angelo. Why was a wing or a hand able to overwhelm an entire distant facade? And the immense and overpowering convex face of the tomb of Hadrian, once again crowned by one of those angels from the bridge, risen and triangulating with the intent to dwarf the castle too. The Arch of Constantine, the great diagram of metamorphosis, the column and lintel system of the Greeks pushed forward of the new, more continuous structural arch of the Romans to hold the capitals of myth and culture, the sculpture and words of history, a wider structure supporting and regenerating art and history, the present designed to carry load and bring in energy, chronology in section, horizontality, and vertically, the gradation from nature to art vertically, the ground, the rock, the wall, the column, the capital, the sculpture. The Medici tomb, creating node between the images of day or night, their supports, the geometries behind them, and there is the range of textures and levels of representation, from raw stone to intricate cornice, from hand and face to masks of life and death. Timgad was a populace of columns. It was bronze for some reason with a charcoal sky. It was square. You could see the angled temple space hitting the outside edge. You felt the tightness of the square underneath the line of the road to Lambesis. When the columns halted and exposed the tight plane, or the gridded skin was a forum or market. It served every function. The surveyor's cross was drawn in the center of the intersection. And feel the amphitheater tangent the inside edge. May 3rd. Today I saw Valinotto, a church built for farm laborers by a padrone in the 1740s, designed by Vittone. We had to go to a farm and fetch an old man in the pouring rain who opened the wooden doors. The volume was filled with the smell of manure and sweet grass and the loud chirping of hidden birds. The colors were the beautiful earths and pastels of true Italian landscape and angels. Cats walked through constantly, and the altar had many offerings of local flowers freshly picked. I cried. You see, it was wanting to be able to create the whole thing. The geometry, the sheer warp, the paintings, the weathering, the humming of life inside it, the stench, the knowledge of the people from the farm, and the difficulties of getting there. It was real beauty I saw today. It was real Italy, real land. How to explain what I have paid in to see it? It is worth it. I will always need it. It is the first time I have felt a church in my mouth, my nose, my ears, my eyes, sweet and teeming with life. July 13th, 1977. Rome remains a crazy and amazing set of rooms to live in. The nightlight is a sort of bronze incandescent, and the streets are paved with small black cubes of tufa stone that feel soft and low and have no curbs or definition between facades, streets, and cars. It is a feeling of being in a house with tall walls covered with windows and portals and long halls leading to big salons with fountains. The dark outdoor dirtiness of it, the littered interior corridors, views abruptly penetrated by foliage of a savage and ancient imagery, always gives me a deep feeling of abandonment, physical and in life. It is a truly ancient and pagan place, and it is possible to feel totally swallowed and hidden, a witness to change far away from this uninfluenceable interior. April 28th, 1977. My fears and the loss of ancientness. Why build a forum? What group of people decide for what group of people that a forum, that word which means to me all diverse views in an agreed civic framework, should be constructed, generated from, gridded, tied, projected, cut, or incised into a city? Oh, a city, a hive, especially on a plain, or a place that was an earth place before a humanly recognizable one. Città. The world feels like grids hitting grids, and how to construct a group of architects to plan it. One for the sizing and functions, one for the time understanding of the flow of people in a day, one for the scale of the enclosure and a sense for the details of the character of that place, one for the sculptures and the fountains.
Thank you for inviting me to this mythic place here. And history is sedimenting or sediments itself in cities, as we all know. And most of the cities aspire to give the reader a story of success. And maybe London, I have to say, after the last 5 days I spent here, is maybe the most magnificent example of cities telling a story of a sequence of success after success. Berlin is the complete opposite. Berlin, the townscape, the cityscape of Berlin is talking about rupture, failure, and misdeeds. And thereby, it is a very interesting city for artists and writers, and for all people with a post-heroic mentality. And however, and especially after the fall of the wall, this documents of history and this confronting these collisions of history was a huge challenge, which I have to say, all in all, the Berlin architectural community was not capable of confronting. Most architects in Berlin of that time had a deep disbelief in the poetics and the power of architectural language. So this was a tragic situation, I would say. On the one hand, there is this city which demands so much of a poetic response in order to confront the collisions of history. And on the other hand, let's say the outskirts of a purely servant and functionalist attitude towards architecture. Architects escaped to simply tracing what was left of history and trying to indulge in some sort of sentimental reconstruction, which did not much make sense and did not show much sensibility neither. And it was in that situation that Matthias Sauerbruch, an alumnus of the AA, as you know, and I had the idea to invite Diane to a 2-year, there's a microphone, to a 2-year guest professorship at the TU Berlin. And I think this was a very lucky idea because Diane's concept of an existential urbanity was, I think, exactly the tool which could cross this deep gap, this deep abyss between what the city needed and what were the architects capable of doing at that time. And I think, as we know, but I just want to remember this, one of her tools was to set up a triangle, as I would call it, maybe. I hope this is correct, between the site and a text, a literary text, because after all, literature is what is the monument of individual thoughts and thinking. And the student, let's say the author, architect, who is traveling in between these other points of the triangle and enlivening it. I think that this was the one thing. The other thing is what stayed very much with me in my mind all the time is her, into the tradition of John Haydock, if you want to say so, the responsibility of the architect to reinterpret program and to even invent programs. And I think particularly in neoliberal times, as the 90s were, this was quite a thing to do and a necessary thing to do. When we invited these guest professors, the lecture theme was the gray zones of architecture. And Diane started her application lecture by saying, there are no gray zones in architecture. Architecture is black and white. This became quite a statement in the history of the TU Berlin, I would say. And I think when you look at the Nolly plan, you see something of what she meant. But I think she meant it in many terms. Architecture as making a statement and a figure ground and public, private, and so on. Many aspects. Nevertheless, I would say, when I look at the student projects, here you see only the student projects for Berlin from the Cooper Union, because the Berlin ones were never really properly documented, which is really a pity, I have to say. And the reasons are not, they are manifold, let's put it this way. And when you look at these models, they are hard to read because they are, I think, conceptual models in the sense that you are not really clear, cannot be really clear about which parts are meant as a physical interventions and which solids are simply meant as a signifier of thought and of concepts, past concepts or reinterpretations. But this is exactly, I think, what makes them so interesting till today as an inspiration for a more lively attitude towards the city and for unveiling the hidden stories of the city. Thanks to YAEL, I was invited to make my own, let's say, speculative architecture, autonomous architectural drawings for Berlin, and I chose as the site the Tempelhofer Feld, the former Tempelhof Airport, which is a striking poetic place because when you arrive at it, it feels like arriving at the sea, with the wind, with the sun, with a completely flat horizon. And I didn't want to be one of these architects who destroy these things which are fascinating at the site by projecting themselves onto it. I wanted to preserve this horizon. And that's why I did nothing else in a way than flattening the ground, which I think is the primal architectural act. And flattening the ground, providing a plaza, a piazza, allowing to hold in before crossing this threshold between the city and the field. And sort of hiding under this carpet for spaces devoted to debate, cross-milieu debates, and to silence, so to speak, for the inner monologue, if you want to say so. And a third aspect of this project is, it is a very, I think, Louisian project, if I might say so, because it is about the circumstantial and the ideal. It's my first and only project dealing with a square. And it is paying homage to the two greatest architects of Berlin. In that sense, it is, I think, also a very Berlinish project. On the one sense, there is a huge platform, which is paying homage to Mies van der Rohe and the National Gallery. Just that I took away the temple, of course. So it's an inversion of the project. And on the other hand, it is, of course, a homage to Hans Scharoun with the stepped terraces of the Berlin Philharmonic in the plenum. But again, it's a sort of an inversion because there is no stage in the middle, but everyone is speaking from his seat, just like in the Houses of Parliament in London. So it's an homage to London also. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm going to speak about my relationship with Diane through Edinburgh. So I was very fortunate enough to know Diane from about 2003, and we had a series of conversations, some of them very intermittent. Maybe 6 months, a year might go by before we talk again, but you'd get a phone call out of the blue, and you talk about things, and it's great. But we also had maybe a series of relationships to places that was built up over those years. So these slides that I'm showing, this set of 6 images, is trying to kind of encapsulate some of those places and some of the conversations. I'm only going to be able to elaborate a tiny little bit. But maybe just to outline that, so I teach in the University of Edinburgh, in the Edinburgh School of Architecture. The project in the bottom left and in the bottom right is our project for the book. It was undertaken by 7 of us, 7 colleagues who all teach at the School of Architecture. Some of them PhD students, some of them graduated PhD students, but what we represent are a range of studios. So what I'm sort of saying is that through that initial meeting with Diane, her legacy in Edinburgh is quite enormous, actually. It's quite enormous. So it's still going on. So let me point some of it out. So in the top left image, so I met Diane in Helsinki at a conference, and a bit like as Tim is elaborating, Tim was elaborating, once you meet Diane, it's really quite a moment. So you imagine a conference with 200 people in a room, and she stands up just out of the blue and says, "Hey, does anybody want to get a helicopter to Villa Maria?" And I thought, yeah. So I stepped forward, and it took a while for others to step forward, but because I was the first to step forward, we became really good friends. And it turned out that we did go to Villa Maria. There were 9 of us on a rented bus. Lots of stories to do with that, but I can't go into that. I wished we had also gone to the curated and discussed Weiner Altonen and Alto. But maybe that image is enough just to talk about some of the pervasive themes through this set of images. So figure field, figure ground, so important, as has already been highlighted. But maybe the one thing I can say is that artist, author, sculptor, architect, it's not that Diane thought that the architect is the same as all of these, but actually I think she thought all of these were architects. This was architecture. Writing is architecture, sculpture is architecture, all of it is architecture. And once that opens, so rather than actually sort of claiming the ground of the artist or claiming the ground of the author, claiming the ground of the architect is the important thing. So I was lucky also, like Holger, to invite her. I was in a position at the time to invite her to become our Simpson visiting professor, so she came, and so I had the pleasure of her working in my studios for 2 years and in the school, so we got on great. And maybe something that she would say to many people, but she also said to me, "Dorian, go to any city, study any city, but go to Rome." So the second image, that middle image, archiscape. So you see there Piranesi. Now, of course, Piranesi, Robert Adam, you've got the Rome-Edinburgh connection, so we can open up many, many conversations. But I was also lucky enough to be invited, as was Diane, to go to Sardinia and teach in Sardinia. So Alessandro Melis, who was behind the Venice Biennale project that allowed us all to get together, also invited us to Sardinia. And so Diane also and I had these And I can't even remember if we were in Sardinia at the same time, but I think we were, but I can't remember. Maybe not. No, anyway, but it feels as if we were because the conversations were so deep. I'm sure I was driving along in a car with her talking about the Sardinian landscape, but it was obviously just over a phone call. But anyway, we discussed Nivola, of course, who has this amazing connection to New York. And so this figure field, figure ground, and I learned that an exhibition of Nivola went to the Cooper in 2020, so sadly she wasn't involved in that, but what she would have given to be involved in that exhibition is such a sad thing. But anyway, Nivola and his connection to this work of architecture where literally the ground shapes the figure and the figure shapes the ground is such an architectural premise, and it's infused our work throughout. And a little image in the middle, at the bottom, the Pergola Village in Orani. Such a beautiful project. So again, an influence to our project, but again, this is something we're beholden to Diane about, which is this idea of the pergola, the vined pergola connecting. So all the houses are connected by vined pergolas, and the town square is opened as this pure space of architecture, of sculpture. And in that square is the one monument that looks a little bit like the one in the top right, although that's a different project, that's in Sassari. And of course, Nivola, as you know, was a Sardist, so there's a whole kind of political, literary connection between Sardinia and New York, but also Rome and Edinburgh and Rome and New York and all the greats of architecture. And just one other little detail I'll point out to finish. The book in the middle is by a good friend, Hayes Wallace de Vries. Hayes was on that same minibus. But we didn't know until about 4 or 5 years later when we became friends and he came into we were connected through another chap in Holland. And anyway, Hayes and I become such good friends. So it was a shame he wasn't involved in those conversations because I would have loved to have talked to Hayes on Piranesi and Robert Adam. So anyway, I'll conclude there.
Using the slides as a starting point for a dialogue between friends, colleagues, architects, and teachers, all these studiers, it is here we dwell, finding and constructing the frame, that relational in-between and within contexts, histories, in the act of inquiry, which holds and gives space its power. This dialogue is interchangeable between speaker and listener. In seeking knowledge and relations between instants or stories, we draw testimonies of past narratives that bear witness, a recounting of the route to see, interchangeable with to know. Situating in architecture not just physically between breaths or strides, but mentally, presencing between an idea or vision the past is some future tense. We will return to this. The first slide situates Diane and her walk within Manhattan, the city where she taught, practiced, and lived. Diane's New York revealed here between 2 blocks off 5th Avenue, where she lived and worked, and her walk 53rd Street. On access of Washington Square Park, I begin where Diane lived and worked on West 9th, between 5th and 6th Avenue, underlining shifting grids and watery origins, spring, marsh, and crossing creeks, and the beginnings of John Randall 1811 ideal grid formation. That moves northward through Midtown, crossing Broadway's Desire Line with Cooper Union and its squares at another corner of Central Park. In each of its iterations on West 9th, number 36, 16, 20, Diane clears space, a room for living and working within the block structure, exclaim a wall of rooms for books, kitchen, closet, bed, bath, to the larger room, the street or garden, drawn out as cinematic frame Hitchcock's Rear Window, connecting inside out and vice versa, embedded intimacy within relation to a collective civicness. In another block on Fifth Avenue, drawn also from a watery memory, the reservoir at Rand Park and Central Park. But situate east on 33rd Street in Midtown between 5th and 6th and Park Avenue, and its southern terminus at Grand Central, an earlier civic room at 42nd, where investment in infrastructure of vertical separation, trains and cars give opportunity for the civic room and a new ground on Park. Second slide is 57th Second Street Walk. Inhabiting the memory of Diane with students on her 53rd Street Walk. We did it many times. Embodied in the tempo between streets, between hearing and seeing, reading and drawing out the dialogue of architecture. We start in 53rd Street at 375th Street, Park Avenue, the Siemens Building by Mies van der Rohe, designed in 1958 by, of course, Mies. The photograph of the building is taken from the Lever House, of course, opposite, from above. Sorry. Reinforcing the intentionality of the site's purchase, and constructed in dialogue between Europe and America. Here, Mies pulls back the building volume from that suits on Park. And he did that. And raised the public up a plinth, a frame in the ground, right? To sit and lean, to look across and over the street, giving a nod to the three-party structure of history, the New York Men's Athletic Club. Here from the interior room and reflected, reflecting a dialogue both down and across to the Lever House at street level, showing how it's done in America. The first free plan by Gordon Brunshaft and Natalie DeBose of SOM, and the second glass skyscraper after the UN Secretariat building, brings us in on ground level, layering public space vertically, the cafeteria holding acting as a canopy and holding the corner of 53rd and Park, the sky light passing through the lobby facade, crossing between exterior to interior room interchangeably. Within both crossings, we acknowledge a contextual history, creating a room between elements, column and wall, which goes through, and makes all the students do it too. The calm and quality created in the eddy, in sunlight found also in the last project, Paley Park, which again reflects, in a way, her own living space. So again, delineating the room through the simple elements of wall, paving stones, and trees, which act as room, threshold, and enclosure, extending across sidewalk and street, creating a porch through steps and a portal to the room. The walls, again, frame, functioning to structure and hold space and water, mechanisms, and a small sandwich shop. Very important. Creating both the curtain of wall, which screens the noise from the street, and an occasion of sitting, observing and daydreaming, mixing with memories of the dapple light, so it's transporting us, speaking to an intimacy of interiority, are within our civicness, observing the street from within.
She begins with images of Faust in his study, surrounded by what she calls books and architectural fragments. She says that Faust is a contemplative person who's always in his study working, an autonomous figure who's steeped in a constant self-examination of his role relative to the collective history. It's obvious she's describing her image of the architect. And actually, she claims in her lecture that the first versions of the Faust myth, Faust was an architect. Faust has built himself a world of books, a kind of presence of history that he has direct, intimate contact with. Intimate experience of history as opposed to factual knowledge. The facts must be penetrated. This study is the contemplative's mind turned inside out, and the city turned outside in. The doubts and confusion of one's own thoughts and the cacophony of the city are left behind. They're fall silent in the study. Here, history, praxis, precedent, knowledge, they look down from the walls, they look out from the shelves, and they expect something from the studier. The study is the place of genesis of architectural thought. This isn't the place we usually associate with the architect, the office, the drafting room, places of production. The architect surrounds herself or himself with books, tools, examples of exemplary works of architecture. Cologne Cathedral is one for John Haydock. A confraternity of thought that forms a conversation across time. That is architecture's literary dimension. Architects, through their works, speak to one another. They challenge one another, inspire one another. In that lecture, Diane refracts Walter Benjamin's thoughts in his essay, The Author as Producer. I'll quote her. He says that for work to become art, it must have a literary dimension. And he says that this literary dimension can be progressive or regressive. Progressive has to do with freedom, free will, and the role of the individual indicating their position relative to the collective memory of history. The city must be protected from regressive forces, anti-historical, anti-democratic. This requires the performance of a certain kind of knowledge, what Diane in this lecture called the alchemy of the plan. The architect, we perform this alchemy by reconfiguring the plan of the city, by bringing singular civic elements into being and into relationship with one another. Catherine gave an example of these operations, this alchemy. The play between the Seagram Building, Lever House, and Paley Park on 53rd. The intimate story of the city, traced by the relationship of civic elements, is visible and therefore effective to those who read the city in plan. Diane said you didn't need to visit a city, you just need to look at the plan. The plan is the city's literary dimension. These alchemical operations, she says, are based on an understanding of the structure of the city, its skeleton, its syntax. She uses these words without explanation, without apology. Diane inherited this conviction about the existence of urban structure from Mies. But it's not as if Mies knew what this urban structure was. He only felt painfully its absence in what he called the God-forsaken confusion of our time. Mies had a spiritual faith. I'm not exaggerating. A spiritual faith that there must be what he called an organic principle of order by means of which man can bring himself and things into concordance, producing beauty by means of the proportions between things. This is Mies's introductory speech as the head of the Armour Institute, the IIT. This is the first speech he gives, his challenge laid forward. Now, you have to understand this order that Mies is talking about has nothing to do with urban morphology. Not for Mies, not for Diane. Morphology, nothing to do with generic processes or principles about urbanization. Diane had a secular version of Mies's faith. Her affirmation of urban structure rested, by my understanding, upon the intensity of her literary reading of the city, the depth of her understanding of what YAEL called the intimations of the plan. But perhaps it's a mistake for us to imagine this urban structure as some kind of underlying or overriding primary organization, some kind of ideal or prefigured order that structures the elements of the city. We could habitually imagine that. We could imagine instead that this structure is the holding together of these singular elements. From an architectural perspective, John Randall's grid that you speak about is not an abstract system. It's an authored element, and those of you who know the city, we speak about it taking for granted that you know Manhattan, that it is not uniform. There are some cross streets that are wider. There are very irregular spacing of the avenues arising from the existence of topography and hydrology of the city. So it's that eccentricity of the grid that makes it into a singular element. And it's the eccentricity that allows the grid to hold together the elements you spoke about. When you spoke about the relationship of each of those elements, Paley Park, the Lever House, Seagram Building, to the grid, it's through the setback, the exception they produce within the grid. So what am I saying? If you look for an overriding or underlying structure outside of these singular elements, you're not going to find it. So this is another way of imagining order. Fragments held together. This is how T.S. Eliot composed the four quartets in my reading. It's how Beethoven wrote the late quartets. So the efficacy of these operations of the architect, the ability of urban alchemy to protect the city from regressive forces, real regressive forces, depends upon the depth and intimacy of our collective reading of the city, our fluency in reading its plan in Diane's terms. Those who love their city know its plan, read its history there, care for it, and defend it. Architecture education for Diane is an education in conceiving and reading the plan. And this knowledge, Diane believed, is the basis of civic and democratic life. Now, I have many thoughts about Diane. You can perhaps understand that she was a very forceful and, in some cases, provocative person. And I tried to gather some and put them into notes, which you can access if you want from this link. Notes from a previous symposium that Yale organized at Cooper Union in honor of Diane Lewis. Thank you.
We have about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour to have a discussion, and I'm presented with the horrible dilemma of how to do this, given the range of things you've presented. Before we started this, when I was talking to Yael and she shared the PowerPoint with me, I said to her, the images are extraordinary because there are so many, which make me think of splinters of conversations. Chronologically, I can't work out anymore, whether I knew these images before or whether I revisited them. And the one thing I was thinking about all your talks and the power of Diane is how she's led us to this group of things. And also, I hope, given the quote Yael made from that interview, how we talk about architecture. And so the other thing I'd like to say is I'd like to briefly contextualize that interview to which Yael referred. And what happened was Simon Parkes, who interviewed her, is a very good friend of mine. And he told me that the BBC, he'd been commissioned to make 4 programs to coincide. It was with Clinton's second election about being American. He said he was going to Manhattan. And I said, I think you should interview Diane, because I think the explanation you get about the city, what makes it, its structure, thinking about the grid, which some of you have mentioned, is very important. And the thing which is extraordinary is the fact that she had this clarity, this integrity in the way she thought, actually, which allowed her to convey to a general public, not an architectural public, what she thought was so important. And so I tried to think of maybe 3 kind of zones of discussion. And one of them, obviously, is the city. And what I wanted to ask of some of you, in a way, is how did her arrival in Berlin or in Edinburgh change the way you thought? Are there collective understandings? If she said, study any city but go to Rome, how did that affect the way you thought about those cities? And to give you a sort of advance, that's one thing which I think it would be good to talk about. There's another which is about the drawing. And I suddenly remembered this whole riff which was going on, Tim will remember it, a long time ago in the AA, which was this whole thing about paper architecture, that people are drawing here, but they're not actually building, they're not equating the things. And I think the interesting thing about Diane is that the drawing is critical, in a way, to how you develop things. So that's the second one. And the third one has something to do with ethics, democracy, and how you describe that in architecture, the relationship of the mechanism, if you like, and the individual. So I don't know who would like to start. Shall we start with cities? Shall we start with Dorian talking about Edinburgh, or Holger talking about Berlin and her effects?
And we can have Anna following up with Berlin
Exactly.
as well, so maybe we can do this.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind. Happy to try and elaborate more of the amazing relationships developed through Diane. Maybe the thing that's kind of making me want to say something more than anything else is in response to the ethics issue, actually. So there is a beautiful essay in this book by Peter Hitchcock. Yeah, it's a beautiful essay and really recommend reading it. So I'm going to try and give you a little bit of an elaboration, but also then refer that back to Edinburgh, right? So what Peter highlights is this. So it's called something like architecture, the augury of ethics. So even invoking the notion of architecture as an augury is a beautifully poetic, but if you like, Faustian notion. So the idea that architecture isn't necessarily the result of an ethical position, but it actually positions ethics through its own commitment to architecture. And I think the project that's on the screen at the moment is maybe the one that maybe best exemplifies that. You know, when she was asked to do the student competition for Cooper, and the 2 floors of commercial space that was asked for, she said, yes, that's a library. So the whole idea that this exchange between city students and public is such that the library is holds the exchange value rather than this sort of superimposition of some sort of economic transactional commerciality. So in that sense, the drawings of that architecture hold way after the fact that it was never built, and the one that gave the 2 floors of commercial space was built. So in that sense, you could see the omens of architecture were very clear in that structure of the competition and the results of the competition. But Diane's unwillingness to compromise her position is just magnificent, right? So bringing that back to Edinburgh then, right? So Edinburgh is this very strange city. I hope everybody has been there. I hope people get to understand it. It's layer upon layer upon layer of different histories, different architectures. And I guess that regardless of the politics, if you like, of old town, new town, those kinds of things, the point is the lived in architecture transcends any of its instantiations. The architecture is qualitative, it's intact, and it makes space for reliving again and again and again. So in that sense, it does echo Rome in that this permanence of the possibility of architecture. So, and the city of accretions and so on and so forth. So I think that the city is this vehicle through which architecture can be discussed. One might even say the whole project is the architecture of the city.
I just want to add a small clarification because in the book, actually, a person who worked with Diane on this project is writing an essay explaining this one and the student housing competition. So this is actually, it's another project, but the book talks about both of these projects. And they're both for the Cooper Union campus. But the other project is actually on the invitation online on the image that we have for this event is the project that Dorian mentioned. And this is the plaza across the street, another project in which he has a very intense conversation with Miss. So just to clarify that to you, Holger.
Maybe.
You want to start?
Holger asked me to go first, so...
Because I already said something.
So I think I'll start with the question about how Diane's teachings affected my ideas about the city, and also thinking about this in relationship to Berlin. So I was a student of Diane's, and her attitude towards what a project meant often started with the idea of the urban address. And that is something about figuring out what the city is, first of all, to your project, and what your approach is, how you will confront that city in the way that you make an architecture. And for New York, when we were there, it was kind of clear. It's the grid. It has its eccentricities. That's, first of all, the substrate in which you react, in which you plan, and in which you make your design. And I got to Berlin after studying in New York, and I felt like I didn't know what the substrate was. And I started an investigation there, and I ended up writing a book called Berlin, A Morphology of Walls, which maybe is a word you don't like, calling it a morphology, in which Diane also wrote the introduction. And that was a struggle for me to figure out how to address Berlin, what the urban fabric was, and how to draw it. So it's a series of 70 drawings, over 70 drawings, looking at Berlin through time, and also looking for those elements, those little specific projects that respond to the urban situation of the wall at the time, whether that's the city wall, the tax wall, the fortification, the Axisa-Mauer, the S-Bahn ring, or the Berlin Wall as we know it. So all of those things started to build up my idea of what Berlin was as a substrate, as opposed to just thinking of it as maybe your basic European concentric city, but something made up of these very intricate elements that respond and have to do with how we live in that history. And that, however, remained largely outside of architecture, despite finding some of these fragments. And another thing that I'll just respond to, as far as sort of the ethics of and the mechanism of the individual, was my most recent project, which is luckily here, is a architectural novel called Seeing Fire, Seeing Meadows, which also takes place in Berlin, in which I've tried, and still I'm struggling to get on with the brief that Diane has given us, because I took a seminar with her and made drawings of Rome and Berlin and the original islands that happened to be the nucleus of these cities. And she said, "Anna, you have to stick to the architecture," which I felt after finishing the Berlin book that I hadn't actually stuck to the architecture as much as I wanted to. And now I've started to get back into the architecture with this novel, and looking at the problems of agency in architecture, specifically around the problems of free will. And I think that it's a lifelong sort of project. I don't think I've managed, but that's where I am on my own interaction with Diane's teaching.
Before we continue and go to Holger, I would also like to say that there have been projects in this school in different ways about rules and agency and how they affect architecture. And to begin with, I was thinking, what effects did Diane have? What ripples, what influences? And I can't say necessarily that they came from her or directly from her, but I think it's really interesting that they do exist here. Holger?
I think I have to suspect that for Diane, arriving in Berlin was maybe also, it had its disappointments. And I think Diane's favorite author was Goethe. And she expected the students to know 20 Goethe poems by heart. And then she had to discover that these students rather wanted to get something to know about New York culture. And as I said before, even the word history is, for Germans of my generation, implies a burden. And I think this was liberating for all of us that Diane could show and was so interested in, let's say, the positive aspects of the history of Berlin, which is, of course, I mean, I think the first brilliant period of Berlin was the Romanticism. It's one of the three centers of German Romanticism, and this is unfortunately so often forgotten. For an Italophile American as Diane, I think she was a little bit also disappointed that there was no Renaissance in Berlin at all. It was a world like across the Atlantic Ocean, so to speak, for Berliners. And but again, to introduce, let's say, the architectural grammar, which was largely reflected in the Renaissance, I think, into the student minds was also a very important thing in order to free us in confronting the city. Yeah, so I think again, I wish Diane had read Goethe in the original and had learned a little bit more German, because then she could have participated in the public debates in Berlin. This would have been a great thing, a great contribution, but unfortunately she didn't do so, and she remained a little bit an island in that way. She did not enter the political realm in the 90s. And that's sad, but well, we are not yet at the end of the world, I hope. So there's more to do and more to hope.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm wondering whether before we invite Catherine Peter, we should ask the audience and some of perhaps her ex-students as well, whether they would like to contribute in terms of what she brought, what she gave them. No? Complete silence. Shall we keep going then? And
I see glimpses from former students
yes,
in the room. If you want to
I
speak
know.
up, we would love to hear you, even if it's a thought to share a question. But no pressure. Maybe
we
Peter,
can do this afterwards
Peter would
over
like to
drinks.
respond maybe to the ethical
So
question.
yes,
And
please.
And maybe provoke some students to speak,
Yeah,
or colleagues to speak.
yeah.
We're talking about a very problematic person, Diane Lewis. You can get this feeling, and it's kind of like we're handling this stick of dynamite here, and we want to do justice to it. But there's always a doubt in many people's minds when they encounter Diane Lewis, because she affirms what is. And if one has certain kind of, let's say, critical reaction, one would say, how do we know this is so? How do we know architecture is the basis for democracy? See, I told you I was going to provoke response. And I'm glad. See? This is exactly what I wanted to answer. The question has emerged.
Well,
I
talking about aspects of Mies who wanted to drop the skirts of all these towers so you could provide a free plan in the city. You know, this is a political act. It's not attributed to Mies, but she was very concerned with this kind of thing. Neither are we talking about her concerns of historiography, or the fact that most of architectural history is historical realism. It doesn't take any direction from the French post-structuralists, particularly Foucault, and based on the Nietzschean idea of a genealogy of history. None of this has been discussed, and this is what's central to the way that she wanted to debate intellectually.
Well, I want to keep going, okay? And then I'll hear your thoughts, and then it will be a good conversation, which is what we're all here for. So I want to just say something here, and you can respond. It will be good. If you're speaking to someone who affirms what is true, and it's an astonishing affirmation, you perhaps suspend your doubt and open your mind, and you will either get confirmation or not by your own open-mindedness. Now, Diane could claim that only those who know the plan of the city, know its history, love it, and will defend it. That depth of historical knowledge is a prerequisite. How many people have articulated that? Well, I can tell you something, being a New Yorker. The only New Yorkers who are New Yorkers, and that means you could have arrived 2 months before from Iowa, it makes no difference, are those who remember what was at that place, that intersection, before what was there now exists. That's the criteria for being an echt New Yorker, is that you know that history. When I hear that, when I realize that, I think, Diane, is she so far off that ground of knowledge of history is the ground of affection? And from that affection comes the desire to defend the city. Now, would you deny that the city is always under threat? That the architects are often the perpetrators of the crime. So the relationships that she spoke about so generally, I can confirm. Now, you asked about post-structuralism. Okay, fine. We can always open other doors, but I know from my experience of Diane that the basis of her critique was not through theory. It was through her intimate love of the city.
Catherine.
I'd just like to say that for me, it was her reading the city was really a way to understand it, not just what is, but what was, and this kind of layering of time and movement between things, whether that's time like in layers of strata, or time as in like how the sun changes or the people move through it. And so it's not solely even architectural, if that makes sense. It also talks to the deep strata of geology, of water, of things that she was very appreciative of in a way. And that reading, you can read it in the structures of the city and how it reacted to what was before, much earlier, like the orange of the place. Yeah. And so for me, that's also an ethical question, to understand what was and then what has been done with it is an ethical thing. And how do you make space for more than just the economics of the thing? Economics are part of it, but it's not the whole thing, I guess. And so that's an ethical question for an architect, because we're part of that dilemma in a way, as you said, erasing the city that was through putting new buildings up, right? So I think we have to, as architects, really stand up for that deeper reading of the place in a way, and the city as a cultural construct.
I mean, I understand your presentation a little more in that context, and the reference to the grid as well as something which is layered in different ways, which is interpreted in different ways. Before we move on, do you have any comments to say? And are there any more responses to what Peter said? You know, his so-called provocation. Are there any other people in the audience who would like to respond to that?
Don't be polite.
I think that's a pity in a way. I think it's a pity that nobody wants to contribute, but maybe it's just that it needs to be considered first. So, can we go back a little more to the drawing? And because the drawing has appeared in all kinds of ways, and we've ended on a project as well, but not maybe so much of a drawing. Let me ask another question, which is, there have been moments in your presentations when you've presented projects which you made for the book. Can you talk a little, the people who did this, about, I know you explained a bit about the project you presented, but can you talk a bit about your use of the drawing in these things, your use of the plan, for example?
Oh, wow, right. Sure. Maybe it's good to... All right. So maybe... is that working? Yeah, maybe... so these are just 2 tiny little bits of what are 12 pages in the book, and the drawings are quite voluminous. And maybe the point I want to make about the drawing is that when we were preparing for the exhibition, this was during COVID, right? So nobody was meeting. So what we were doing was exchanging drawings. Our team, 7 of us, we were drawing to each other. We communicated entirely through drawing. So there were so many drawings, so many drawings. And the delight of that is that we know how to read the drawings, we know how to talk to each other through drawings. And this is a kind of sensibility, a skill set, a kind of, we talk about reading the plan, Diane's talking about reading the plan, but the plan isn't just obviously the plan is the whole. And I would say that if one wants to invoke some sort of theoretical position, and she was conversant in Kristeva and the intertextuality and all those kind of theories too. But the point was it was done through the drawings, the architectural drawings. It wasn't words up front. It was drawings up front, and the words came through the drawings. So we did have our team, our project was a project to draw at a time when we were really kept out of studios, kept in our rooms, and so to a certain extent, the architecture of the plan, the architecture of the city, was it was the project we set up ourselves in order to respond to the call that the book and the exhibition, the Venice Biennale exhibition, set up for us. I mean, I could elaborate the project, but it's maybe not to do so through just the 2 little drawings. It'd be nice to see the whole thing, but the point is that this space in Edinburgh is so charged. There are so many drawings that pre-exist this project that this project brings in. And this project has a life way beyond this book. This project is still resonating in the city of Edinburgh because it's quite a radical project to put architecture as bridges. The pensile city, the very idea that Piranesi put forward for Rome, the pensile city, and to claim that for Edinburgh, is still being argued out in Edinburgh amongst certain people.
Even though we don't have your drawings from your project, Peter, I think it's important maybe you answer to this question, because the role of drawing in Peter's project in the book is very critical, and I think there's some things to it that are not dependent on slides behind.
Anyone who's curious about all these drawings, there must be books somewhere you can flip through.
There are.
And so there's a very tangible collection of For our group, for my work, the drawings were lino cuts, not very efficient, not very practical, but the act of drawing is an act of creating, carving, creating space, carving the paths that we found, animal and human paths. I just want to say something about Diane's idea of drawing. You know, the judge, when the judge has the gavel in his hand, or her hand, and says guilty and slams the gavel, that is not just a word, that's an act. It's called a speech act. And the act is transmitted through a mechanism that lies behind the judge. And it's almost magical. If you've been to a courtroom, it is scary. As soon as that happens, the accused is handcuffed and taken out. For Diane, the act of drawing of the architect is analogous to that act. It's an architectural act. When you draw the line, it is like this. It is done. It is so. It will be. And the mechanism takes over and carries that forward to fruition. That's why the drawing is so powerful. It's engaged through her faith, her force of will, and the reality of building. It's engaged in constructing reality.
So, Holger, for example, sorry, can I just ask first, did that affect in some way education, the way students drew when she came?
The way she
Diane,
drew?
Yeah.
When she was in Berlin.
When she was in Berlin.
Well, I was a student of Diane in New York, spring term 1988. It was her first own studio at that time because Raymond Abraham was on sabbatical. And in Berlin, I was not her student. I didn't participate in the studio. I cannot really answer this question, I have to say. Maybe, but I can say something about Diane's drawings. And I think I was surprised when I looked at her drawings in the Inside Out book, because on the one hand, her definitive drawings for the projects are quite sober. They are black and white, they are very factual, they are mostly sections and plans, very little spatial 3D drawings. And on the other hand, what I was not surprised about, but what I enjoyed very much by looking in this book, she was amazing in sketching, really unbelievable. And I think that's what Gerard Sullivan, a friend of mine who wrote this article on these two New York projects, also said, because he worked on this competition and he came one morning into the Cooper Union, was really amazed how Diane was doing at the very last minutes of a project freehand sketches, precise sketches of the idea of the project. And I really recommend in her book to look at a yellow trace sketch for a little project for the site of a former synagogue in Marburg in Germany. And there she was participating in a symposium to convert the site into a Jewish museum. And there again, Diane reinvented a new program. She did not propose a museum, which she considered to be a dead thing, and she proposed a chapel. And she traced a chapel with an organ and other things into this excavated site of the former synagogue. And that is an extreme, it's so small and one drawing only, it's extremely powerful and speaking intervention of architecture. I wish I could sketch like this.
Could I just?
Yes, because I was going to ask too.
Sorry. So the thing I want to interject is just that Diane, in my experience of her, rejected overproduction. She, in her studios, was not interested in us making all the drawings and making all of the possible views, anything like that. That was absolutely anti to her way of thinking. She set up one day at the beginning of the semester the day of the partie drawing, which was we all came out to the main critique space of Cooper Union, which is a larger irregular spaced room, and hung yellow trace on the wall, and we were asked to draw the partie of our project. And you had the day. You're going to stand there for hours and watch everyone build up layer of sketch over sketch of trace of the partie of the project, which could be a section or could be a plan. But in the end, it was something that is pivotal and structurally necessary to the way that you think about the building.
I just want to add that in that it's very important to mention her reading of Rossi and the skeleton of the city, because to take up what Anna is sharing as an experience of a student goes back directly to Diane's notion that you have to draw your architectural principle only in the necessary parts of the architectural project, and never to put your critical architectural element in the things that are not necessary if one was to imagine the eroded city and what's left behind. So it's a long conversation. I think she discussed with herself, with others, and in lectures she gave with Rossi's writing on the city. But one of the things she did clearly take from him and respected him for is his writing on the skeleton. So it goes back directly to this point from Anna.
Thank you. Tim, since you worked with her on a project, do you want to comment on that? Do you want to comment on the drawing?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, she had me drawing. She had me drawing architectural drawings in the end. No, she just had such a sort of belief in power on you know, what you could do with a pencil. And with the Kunsthalle, that's, you know, as I mentioned, the night before the presentation, we were all drawing. Gerard was drawing, he was doing the drawings, I was doing the drawings. It was about 4 of us, and, you know, I was really proud, you know, to architectural presentation. Yeah, I mean, the idea that the plan is the literature of the building of the city is such a fantastic thing. When I talked with her here, unfortunately, her record here, you can even find it, could you? Because she never worked out with Charlotte how to get paid, so she didn't come very much. In fact, she came out little. She left me with one of her students who just graduated from Cooper Union. She palled him over, and so he and I ended up running the studio and Diane directing from afar. But, you know, I during that studio, I understood fully how she was directing students, you know, the drawing, the plan, the fragments, you know, finding those elements in the city and drawing them and coming, you know, becoming them, you know. It's that wonderful kind of, you know, and the students, you know, they get there in the end, and it was all, yeah, it was the plan in the section, you know, that was sacred. And the idea that, I shouldn't tell the story, but I'll tell the story.
Please.
Sorry.
Please do it.
We were, one time I was on the judging panel for some reason for the BBC Design Awards in kind of 1993 or something. I was going backwards and forwards to New York working with Diane at the time, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm doing this, you know, I'm judging." She said, "Oh, who's in it then?" And so I listed who was in it, and there was, you know, Zaha was in it, you know. And she'd done this fire station, right, for the Vitra building, right? Diane says to me, "Fire station? That's not a fire station." She said, and you know, because I mean, Zaha and Koolhaas, Rem Koolhaas, were the antithesis of anything that Diane believed in. You know, the idea of the tabula rasa was such anathema to her. You know, the Koolhaas idea. You just wipe the whole thing out. You know, start again. For her, you know, the fragments, the pieces, the bits of the city, the found bits, the lost bits, they were the poetry that you could build on. They were the poetry you could engage with, you know, and come out with. But when she said, Zaha, I mean, clearly Zaha didn't work off the plan, did she? She create things like this. So so I went back and I was speaking to the producer of the television program, and I was telling her the story, and I said, you know, she said, that's not a fire station. So the producer said, well, I know, we'll get a fireman to go around. I don't know if anyone ever saw that program. There's this fireman bumping into walls, and, you know, it's like, so she just had that insight, you know. She kind of saw what the mechanism of doing architecture was. She understood what it could be, what it should be, really, in her mind. It was black and white. There wasn't no grey. There wasn't no curvy bits, you know. It was sort of say it and say it true, you know. And say it with a drawing, say it with a pencil, you know. Wonderful lines.
And explain it.
And explain it, yeah.
That's the other thing.
The insights. I mean, I couldn't believe how many insights I had working with Dan. Just, didn't know that. Wow. You know, she just kind of threw things open. You just saw them for a way that you'd never seen them before. She just clarified it all, you know, made sense of things that had never made sense before, kind of muddly and grey. And that was her brilliance.
I think
We have a question. There's a question behind you.
Hi. Hi there.
Hello.
Will you introduce yourself?
I'm Ofune. I'm a former student of Diane, studied at Cooper Union. And apologies, I missed the first part of the talk, but I just wanted to jump on the insights bit, because I think that this discussion today is great, but there was a provocation.
Yes.
And the thing about Diane is there are so many levels with which she could be discussed. I don't think that's a whole nother lecture, you know. So it's just the richness of it, of her thought. I think that's something I'd like to point out. I don't think it needs to be an either-or thing. But then also the insights, because one thing I would say about Diane is that it was constant. So not just for the student, which I was a student, she often worked with other professors. So there was a pair. I remember two, one whose name I remember now, Professor Schumacher. And there was this constant, really brilliant exchange between them. Even when she was going around to our desks, looking at our work, she was constantly, it's like she could talk to us at the level that we could understand, because when Diane Lewis is talking, you need to make notes, you need to remember, you need to recall. It might hit you in 5 years what she said 5 years before. Like, it's one of those things. But at the same time, in order to keep herself engaged, I think as well, with the insight, she had that sounding board of, like, the professor, Professor Schumacher was brilliant, or is brilliant, and the other guy was completely brilliant. And when they would speak, I honestly, half the time, I did not know what they were talking about. I'd have to just be like, I need to note this down for later. So I think that's what I wanted to call out, the insight. So you start where you are, and it just is inspirational, because it inspires you as an architect, because architecture is just such a rich topic. And that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. That, I think, is a very good way of bringing this to a close, because what I was going to say was that there is something, thank you, open-ended about this. And I personally like the kind of discussions that have this open-ended quality. And I think for Diane, one could imagine talking late into the night, arguing about things. And that was a kind of generosity. But so I would like to close this event by thanking the AA for hosting it, thanking YAEL hugely, because for some of us, we've been waiting for this event in London for a very long time. And thanking the speakers and the audience and saying that there are drinks in the north, well, I knew it was the south jury room, sorry. South is there, thank you. And also that there are books on sale as well. Have I forgotten anything? No. Manager, yes.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for organising this whole thing. Great. So let's go and talk.